Hello, and thank you for joining us for the webinar, So You Want a TEM, Landmines to Avoid When Selecting a TEM for Your Business on behalf of Telecom. Before we dive in, please feel free to send questions throughout this discussion, as we'll have a Q&A session at the end. I'm Kelly Teal, Senior Research Analyst at AOTMP Research and Advisory, and I'm here with Scott Lawrence, AOTMP's Vice President of Performance Insights. If you could click to slide 2, please. Let's begin. This past fall, AOTMP Research and Advisory asked its enterprise panel about plans to change telecom expense management vendors. More than 1/3, or 36% of them, say they want to do so. Scott, why don't you tell us some of the reasons why that's the case?
Sure, Kelly. There are really 3 common landmines that we discovered that are creating this desire to change TEM vendors. And the first, enterprises are dealing with inaccurate inventory and ineffective inventory management. So they're seeking this single source of truth, if you will, and oftentimes a key driver for needing a new TEM is this desire for that accurate source of truth from an inventory perspective. Second, enterprises are lacking clearly defined expectations from their TEM vendors. And a lot of these issues, from our experience, can certainly be resolved from upfront planning, good communication. We'll talk a little bit more about this one as well as we move forward. And then finally, enterprises say they're receiving inadequate support from their TEM vendors. And this can mean a lot of different things. And we'll, again, dive into this one in a bit more detail here in a moment. Kelly?
Okay. So now that we've identified the problems, let's talk about their solutions. The first step is to baseline and verify initial inventory. Not doing so will continue to create inaccuracies and oversights. The second is to connect inventory with invoices. And again, not doing so will lead to continued inaccuracies and likely overpayments. The third is to make sure the vendor tracks receipt of all invoices. If it doesn't, bills could go unpaid and the enterprise would suffer late fees and other avoidable challenges. Next, make sure the TEM vendor is overseeing contract compliance. If that doesn't happen, the enterprise could lose out on a lot of benefits it was supposed to gain as a result of specially negotiated deals. After that, make sure optimal moves, adds, changes, and deletes processes are in place. Not tracking MACDs in real time can create problems, including paying for circuits that should have been turned off. And finally, with all this in place, the enterprise should be able to avoid one-time audits that do not provide ongoing accuracy checks and adjustments. Scott?
Thanks, Kelly. The next problem to solve is the lack of clearly defined expectations. To do this, the enterprise must first ensure that roles and responsibilities are clearly defined, documented, and understood. And certainly this is a two-way street. Both the vendors and enterprises should collaborate to ensure that this takes place. Second, make sure automated workflows are in place. This is going to avoid a lot of heartburn from human error, which TEM vendors often avoid through their software and services. They increase that automation and workflow to make tasks easier. And then finally, do a detailed review of the statement of work with the vendor. This is going to create clarity during the implementation and administration phase. And again, going back to the first point, ensure roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. The last landmine to fix is that of inadequate vendor support. To do this, make sure the enterprise clearly understands the service and support plan. This provides assurances that the TEM group knows what to do and whom to approach when help is needed. Next, establish a single point of contact. This will cut down on the bureaucratic runaround that so often gets in the way, and you have that identified single point of contact in which you can go to for help. And then lastly, understand the experience and knowledge levels of the TEM vendor's personnel supporting you. It's much easier to work with people when you know their areas of expertise.
Right. Those are great points. And they speak to this next slide about successful TEM engagement. I really love this quote from one of our enterprise respondents about their TEM vendor. I feel like they want us to succeed in our work as much as we want to. That's a good feeling to have. And really, that's the point of using a TEM. So with that in mind, here are the ways in which enterprise respondents happy with their TEM vendors say those vendors are helping them. The first is acting on discoveries from audits and optimizations. Second, combining management of telecom, mobility, and IT assets and services. Third, continuing to learn and use best practices. And finally, using telecom management to achieve organization-wide business results.
That covers good ground on the vendor side, Kelly. Now let's take a look at some advice enterprise respondents offered to their peers for making TEM engagement successful. And here's some of that advice. Conduct proofs of concept on potential solutions during final selections. And the key thing to note here is during final selection. Certainly you won't want to do this with every single vendor during that initial discovery phase. You'll want to wait for proofs of concept for those final vendors to ensure that you're not wasting time conducting proof of concepts on vendors that will not be able to meet your needs and expectations. Next, fully evaluate potential vendors. Speak with multiple references and verify cost structures. So the references in particular here should be of similar size and scope as your organization's TEM program scope. So, if you're a large multinational, you're certainly not going to want to speak to a smaller entity that doesn't have the global scope that you might have. Next, negotiate the contract that serves the organization best, including TEM-specific service level agreements with contractual penalties for the vendor. Next, create a partnership. Voice opinions and options. So if something doesn't feel right or you have questions in a specific area, don't hesitate to ask. On the flip side, vendors should be proactive in communicating with you, ensuring that you as the enterprise fully understand what to expect. Verify help desk support availability and capabilities if this is indeed part of your project scope. Do you need 24/7, 365 support? You want to ensure if that is the case to make sure that your vendor offers that capability. Next, find out whether the vendor can accommodate any custom projects and needs. So for example, if you might need a special report, a custom report, a more detailed report, ensure that vendor can provide that to you. And in addition, ask them if there's any additional fees for that type of reporting. And then finally, insist on periodic face-to-face meetings during implementation. And this is helpful because we often find when these things take place, there is better communication and collaboration, and roles and responsibilities, needs and expectations seem to be clearer when these face-to-face meetings take place as opposed to constant meetings over the phone.
Great. One last set of considerations before we hand this over to Telenium. If you're one of the chunk of enterprises looking for a TEM vendor, here are some points to keep in mind. Look for a TEM vendor proficient in managing the various technologies in telecom environments, not just fixed and wireline. This is where mobility, IT, and next-generation technologies come in. Weigh the various options for TEM deployments. There are many different ways to go about it. Look for a vendor that demonstrates a willingness to understand your environment and your business. This goes back to the partnership setup Scott discussed. Finally, consider proofs of concept, which we already talked about wherever possible, with the finalists and prior to contract negotiation. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much. Again, this is Greg McIntyre, CEO of Telenium. As a brief overview of any TEM product, there are multiple components that are associated with it. Now, of course, today we're going to dive into inventory management a little more deeply, as well as the move, add, change support, things of that nature. Our product is called TEMS, TIMS, but any TEM product should have these, the AP process or inventory management, audit and optimization, be able to support mobility, all of the IoT, and as we call management of things, MOT, which includes other assets, if you will, such as routers and network appliances, maybe security cameras, should have other asset management associated with it. And then, of course, support, and that's move, add, changes, help desk. Now, inventory, when we get into inventory in the market, everyone says they do inventory. Just be clear, as AOTMP, Kelly and Scott had mentioned there, what you're actually getting in inventory. Sometimes inventory that's included may be just inventory that's as billed. So it's basically what you see on an invoice. Often it's missing a lot of the details, such as the PICs and speeds on broadband circuits up and down and features associated with it. And it often will come in inconsistent. What you would really like to see is a more detailed, or what you should receive is a more detailed inventory that includes all of those features, your LPICs, your PICs, anything associated with any of those circuits and services that you have rolled into the TEM platform, as well as there should be an ongoing management of that initial verification, but then even after that, ongoing. And we're going to get into a little more detail here on this next slide. And there should be, of course, speed and efficiency in managing that ongoing. Here's just a screenshot of TEMS, our platform, and a little bit about the inventory. When we're talking about detailed inventory, you see it over here on the right-hand side, which gives you those PICs, the LPIC, the different features associated with, in this case, it's just an analog line, but if it's a broadband circuit, should have those upload speeds, download speeds, and all the different circuit IDs. Everything associated with it that would be in the carrier's record should be in your platform to view. In addition, the platform should support as well as the vendor contacts. You should have everything that you need as far as support, whether it's service support or move, add, change support, right at your fingertips to be able to do this. So should have those vendor contacts, as well as information about what's at the location where these services reside. So it could be just a list of those items. It could be a management of things, IoT, any other circuits or services available out there at that location. Additional information about the location could include those location contacts that you might have to refer to for support, especially we're talking about remote support here. So you might have to lean on someone out at that location, and it's good to have those contacts for that location available. In addition to other information, such as where the DMARC is located out at that specific location, or be able to upload other attachments. A lot of our customers will upload a picture of the server rack so that they know and have a visual of what it looks like out there, because sometimes you have to refer to some remote hands out there, and it's nice to know that, hey, tell me what that third black box down and the lights that are on it look like in the event of some service support. Okay, and then all of your inventory should tie back to those contracts, to the individual charges, any audit and optimization recommendations and things that you have going on, as well as any disputes associated with it, any moves, adds, changes, and have, like up in the top right-hand corner, instant access to the actual invoices and all of that. Now, we talked about the initial inventory, which is great. So you start out with initial inventory, you have everything detailed, but managing it moving forward can be a landmine at times, because that inventory is only as good as the day that it was entered, right? So it has to be kept up with. And what occurs in any enterprise is there's a whirlwind of change. And within that change and internally, those moves, adds, and changes, it may be you're moving an office location from, moving a sales office or an office from location A to location B. You may be changing your providers or carriers that you're dealing with, different upgrades you have, changing your contracts, which could also affect the inventory, or you're making acquisitions and dispositions, which of course changes inventory. And all of that's internal to the enterprise. In addition, you have external changes. So these the carriers or providers are also making their own acquisitions and dispositions, which means you're moving to a different billing platform on their end, which often mishaps will occur in the billing as well as the inventory, and the features and functionality that you might have had with the prior provider may not carry over to the next one, or additional ones just show up. In addition to those external ones, let's go back a little more deeply onto the internal moves, adds, and changes. Whenever there's a move, add, or change, whether it's a contractual change or whether you're moving an office, there's some inventory items affected, right? So you have to be able to select those and manage those through that implementation process. And typically, any type of change or implementation will take 1 to 12 months, right? It could be you're just adding a circuit out at a location, which is very simple, very short time frame. But then you may be changing your MPLS network to an SD-WAN solution. So it could take 12 months for, depending upon the number of locations that you have. Enterprises do a really good job of managing that implementation all the way to fruition and things work. Though often at the end, once everything is working, people wipe their brow, everything's done great. The billing and the actual inventory that's reflected from the provider doesn't really occur for an additional 2-3 months after the implementation is complete. And so there can be billing errors, as well as the inventory could come across from the carrier wrong. So actually, any change that occurs takes longer than when it was just implemented. So there should be a full workflow process that carries it all the way to that billing and inventory verification. It's like, someone may say, I just want to have an analog line installed. How long does that take? It'll be installed in 3 to 5 days. Reality is that the whole change takes 3 months, because by the time you receive that bill and you verify it, it has to be verified. So keep in mind that whole workflow process. And so generally, enterprises, most anyone is focused on that firefight of getting everything implemented and getting it working. Just keep in mind the full workflow should extend past that. Now, there's a couple of ways in handling that. You can do that internally, of course. Any enterprise can do that internally. Just make certain that billing and inventory process comes to that verification. Or you could outsource that to your TEM provider, BPO, if you will. But on the front end, make certain you know whose responsibility it is to follow that all the way through to fruition. And that should be part of the workflow. Your TEM product should also support that workflow, and being able to identify those inventory items that are associated, what accounts they're on. There'll be certain milestones that are associated with it. It should have basic templates, and then be able to dynamically add milestones. And you'll have notes along the way, as well as you may have other attachments that need to be part of this workflow, as well as any new contracts. So this is just an example of what our TEMS product has as a workflow. And even though this original ticket was moving a whole sales office, keep in mind that might be the project is moving a sales office, but subsets of that are going to be several different changes. So that's removing, in this case, it's adding a new broadband circuit, make certain there'll be also a change to remove the old one from the prior location, and you may be porting numbers or whatever the case might be, but those workflows should be included in there. If you are outsourcing a lot of these moves, adds, and changes, or at least the billing and inventory verification process, internally they're still making changes, and there should be something, we call it a sandbox, that allows them to make all of those changes, record them, same process you see here, except that billing and inventory verification is done by the TEM provider. The TEM provider should as well as internally, depending upon who's doing it, there should be a queue to monitor because things are going to be changing along the way, and your platform should be able to recognize those and say, here's something that I found that's out of the ordinary. It's a discrepancy. It should be able to pass that along to a team, either internally or in a BPO type of scenario to your TEM provider. And these queues will queue up different discrepancies. As mentioned, it could be coming from the provider, the information received from the provider to the TEM platform. There'll be discrepancies, and it'll say, hey, I've got this. This wasn't here last month. It's here this month, so we need to get it inventory, and it needs to be verified that it is yours. So someone has to be responsible for those queues and monitoring these discrepancies. Other discrepancy or other pieces of the inventory queue includes the sandbox, if you will, that, hey, the enterprise has made a change. Now it's time to, verify that billing and verify that inventory, which would encompass also the full max workflow as things have changed, and then coming from the provider to make certain it matches up with that max workflow that was accomplished, whatever that change might have been. Kelly and Scott talked about support, so make certain on the front end where your support's coming from. Is it domestic? Is it offshore? And I'm talking about the TEM provider support that they offer, and maybe some of them actually outsource that to a third party. So just make certain on the front end, where your support is coming from. Those support items can include some things associated with the invoice management process. You have different coding changes, especially when a move has occurred, or maybe you change your whole format of your coding. Even though everyone does the best job they possibly can on that move, add, or change with the provider, they know that the billing address should be X, but it ends up going to Y to one of the remote locations. So who's going to address those billing address changes when those items occur? Know that on the front end. In addition, your TEM provider should have a whole team of experts there available, so that in the event you get overrun with all these moves, adds, and changes, whether you've had an acquisition, a disposition, whatever it might be, you should be able to lean on that TEM provider for those moments when you have those overruns and you need some help to get everything accomplished. So it could be moves, adds, changes, maybe some staff augmentation for a project that you have, or outsourcing that audit and optimization to your TEM provider. They should be there to support you. And that brings us back to Kelly and Scott.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, certainly you brought up some very good points there covering, inventory management and the importance of having that accurate, validated inventory, managing that from a MACD perspective, keeping up with all this change and keeping your inventory accurate. And then the support side as well, certainly a critical piece to the enterprise TEM vendor relationship. Okay, so let me look for some questions here, and I'm checking the queue, and we've got a couple. Greg, I'll pose this one to you first. The analyst mentioned that a TEM vendor should help me act on discoveries from audits and optimizations. How does Telenium do that?
Act upon discoveries of audit and optimization, if you will. We're constantly reviewing and in a continual mode of reviewing our clients' spend and technology. So we are proactively making recommendations that our clients should consider. So those get passed, and we utilize our platform for that and pass those recommendations on. And it's up to them to accept them or want to further investigate it. And once they say, yes, we want to do that, move forward with it, we take the ball, we run with it, and report on it all the way through.
Perfect. Let me look at the queue here. One other question that has come in, and Greg, I'll let you handle this one as well. I want to know more about the support personnel Telenium provides to companies like mine. What kind of staff do you have for helping me manage everything from the mundane to the critical?
Good question. Good question. Well, it depends on there's so many different aspects to it. So, we have a whole team of mobile support specialists, and as well as wireline and emerging technology specialists as well. So we have a large team in each of these different departments in each of these areas for our clients to utilize, and we can even if you have phone systems, if you will, if you haven't moved to a hosted solution, or even if you have, we even have the expertise to help make those moves, adds, and changes. So we're here for our customers on any of those technical aspects that they might need, as well as service. So if they need us to be there 7/24 as a service related for service related issues, we're there as well, and also to augment their own internal staff. And actually, our average expertise here at Telecom is greater than 25 years. So everyone's been in this industry way too long, probably.
That's a lot of years, and certainly would totally agree. I hear from enterprises a lot that one of the biggest challenges and pain points for them when they're managing TEM on their own is following up with the carrier on any errors that need to be resolved, any changes that may not be reflected. So good to hear that Telecom supports that. Okay, well, those are all of our questions, and good timing because we're at the bottom of the hour. I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. Hopefully you found it useful, and Telecom will be following up with everyone after the webinar, so expect to hear from them. And again, thank you for joining today, and hope you have a good rest of your day.